Well, good morning to Sunday School here on Easter Sunday, Sunday morning, April 12th. I'm glad to see you with us this morning. I'm glad you've taken the time to be a part of our Easter service today. We're going to go in our Bibles and we're going to go to the book of 1 Samuel. On Sunday mornings in Sunday school, we started back in the book of Joshua when we went through Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Now we're over into the book of 1 Samuel, talking about the early days of Israel. And of course, it's a very enjoyable study. At least I enjoy it quite a bit. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter number 14. And we need to review. I often do. To catch back up, go over the things that we've previously talked about. In chapter number 13, Saul has already been anointed and crowned to be king. Prior to this as well, Saul stood up against the Ammonite army that came up against his people in chapter number 11. Chapter 11 is where the Ammonites came. The Ammonites were defeated. Saul stepped up. He stepped into the gap that was because Israel was leaderless at that point, and they saw a great victory. This, of course, caused the people of Israel to come and rally around him because of his victory. And then we get to chapter number 12, where Samuel, following this victory, takes the opportunity to speak to the people and to remind them of what it is going to cost them to have gotten this king, and to remind them of the fact that they have left the Lord their God, they have left their king in order to find themselves here. I'm just going to set a timer for myself so I can keep the video short here. Samuel speaks to the people in chapter number 12, and he urges them, he urges them to serve the Lord. He urges them, he says, okay, you've made a decision. God has already allowed you to have this decision, and you're going to live the consequences of the decision of choosing a human king over God's man, Samuel, and over God's leadership himself. But that does not mean that you've gone and marred yourself too much that you cannot then be right with the Lord, that you cannot then still be used by the Lord. And so in chapter number 12, this is a great encouragement to me as a reminder that we can still fear God. As he says there in chapter 12, verse number 14, if you will fear the Lord and serve Him and obey His voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also the king that reigneth over you continue following the Lord your God. And he reminds them that it is perfectly possible for them to still continue to fear the Lord from this point on. They've made decisions that can't be undone. So now he just reminds them, continue to follow the Lord. In chapter number 13, Saul gathers 3,000 men, and as a result of this, Jonathan had smitten a garrison of Philistines, and Saul wanted all of Israel to hear about it. Of course, the Philistines, word quickly spread through Philistia that their puppet state, in a sense, Israel, the small group, the small country to the northeast of Philistia that they had their thumb on, the Israelites, were getting out of hand a little bit. Remember that we talked about last week about how Philistia did not allow Israel to have smiths. In other words, they didn't allow them to make their own weapons or even to sharpen their own weapons. They weren't allowed to have weapons at all. The Philistines made sure that the Israelites had no blacksmiths, and so Israel had to take their farming equipment and go to Philistia to have them sharpened there. And this is one way in which Philistia kept Israel under the thumb, but Israel was getting a little restless. Now they've got this new king, Saul. Now they're starting to gather together small armies of men. Here Saul has 3,000 men, and they're starting to cause trouble. So Philistia decided in chapter 13 they would gather themselves together and that they would pretty much stomp out this little fire that Israel had created. So they had gathered themselves together, and Saul is afraid. Remember in chapter number 12, he had gathered the people of Israel together. Many of them had gone and hidden themselves in caves. They had gone and hidden themselves anywhere they could because they feared what Philistia was going to do to them. Saul tried to gather an army together, but as the days passed by, his army continued to scatter, and the people began to leave and to go hide, and they began to grow more and more afraid of the Philistine army that was encamped just on the other side of the valley. Samuel told Saul to wait 7 days, and then I'll be there. I will offer a sacrifice and put God's hand of blessing upon this battle. But Saul could not wait. So at the last day, Samuel still had not come. Saul chose to offer a sacrifice himself. And there, within 15-20 minutes of Saul making this decision, maybe 30 minutes, in walks Samuel. Saul, what have you done? And this is where Samuel pronounces on Saul the end of his kingdom. He said in chapter 13, verse 13, "Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever." But this is not what's going to happen. And so neither Saul nor his son Jonathan nor any of his sons are going to rule on the throne of Israel after Saul is dead. Then we get to chapter number 14. In chapter number 14, Jonathan makes a plan. And I tell you what, Jonathan here seems to be a fairly upright man. Does Jonathan know who Christ is? Know who the Messiah is? No. But Jonathan trusts God. He has read God's promises. He has been told God's promises, and he trusts that God is going to follow through on these promises. So we get to chapter 14, verse number 1. It says, "Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, came unto the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over unto the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. And the people that were with him were about 600 men. And Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest of Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock. And so we're not going to read every single verse right in here, but there is a steep valley with a ravine between the two of them. And it's not going to be an easy place for Jonathan to climb up and work his way up to where this Philistine garrison is. In one sense, I would think that Jonathan might be approaching this garrison from behind. He doesn't want to be seen approaching, so he's not going to go up the easy way. Maybe he's going to go up the more difficult route. And so he's climbing up, as we read a little bit later, on his hands and feet. He's climbing up the rocks towards this garrison. He brings his shield bearer along with him, but he does not tell his father what he's going to do. Look down at verse number 6. "And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised, that it may be that the Lord will work for us. For there is no restraint to the Lord, to save by many or by few." This reminded me of Deuteronomy chapter number 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse number 30. It says, How should one chase 1,000, or two put 10,000 to flight? Except their rock had sold them, and the Lord had shut them up. For their rock is not as our rock, even our enemies themselves be judges. And how can one person take on 1,000 or two, 10,000? When it is our rock that does the fighting for us. Samuel recognizes this promise. Jonathan recognizes this promise. And so he says, to save by many or by few. There is no restraint to the Lord. Boy, how many times in Israel's recent history has this happened? With folks like the Midianites, that Gideon and his 300 men put to flight, or more like God put them to flight. Over and over and over again this has happened, but yet Saul, this powerful king, this king who had already had such a great victory and had the respect of the people, feared and cowered in the face of the Philistines. Now, as we've talked about before, this battle was real to Saul. All the other battles that he had learned about and heard about in the past, those were just stories. of what God had done. But you see, this battle was real, though. That army on the other side of the valley, those were real men with real swords and spears, and they're going to draw real blood from us. They're really going to take our lives. And sometimes, as Christians, it's hard for us to take the stories and to really believe them and apply them to our current real situations. But we can. We can take God's promises and apply them to right now. To alleviate our fear, to alleviate our discouragement. We can take God's promises and apply them now, which is what Jonathan did. Jonathan's armor bearer is with him. He says, do what's in your heart, do it. So Jonathan says, okay, behold, we will pass over unto these men, and we will discover ourselves unto them. I'll get one of my names right eventually here. Jonathan makes kind of a little pact with his armor bearer. He says, we're going to pop out, and they're going to see us. And what they say next is going to determine what we're going to do next. If they say, stay where you are, we're coming to you, then we're not going to attack. But if they say, come on up to us, come on up here, then we'll know that that's a sign from God that He has delivered us in this battle, and we'll go up and we'll fight. Boy, can you imagine going up against a garrison? Who knows how many hundreds of men might be in this garrison? How many even thousands might be watching the events that are about to take place here next? So he climbs hands and feet. It says, well, look at verse number 11. The Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews have come forth out of the holes wherein they had hid themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us, and we will show you a thing. And Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. They're climbing up hand and foot, and they discover themselves, make themselves visible to the guards who are on watch. And they're like, okay, look, and they're laughing and joking with each other. Hey, look, the Israelites have crawled out of their holes. Look at them, there's a couple right down there. And they said, why don't you come on up here and we'll teach you something. We'll show you how real soldiers act. Come on up here and we have something we're going to show you as they talk to one another. But Jonathan, even though they were speaking to him in derision, Jonathan looks to his armor bearer. This is it. God has showed us. Let's go show them something. Let's go show them the power of Jehovah. Let's go show them the power of our God. Let's go show them what Israel can do when God is behind them. And so Jonathan, it says in verse number 13, climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after them. It says, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. Jonathan ran into the crowd of soldiers. Now remember that Jonathan and his father were the only ones that actually had weapons in Israel. His armor bearer may have had a weapon, I don't know, but it indicates that Jonathan and his father were the only ones earlier in Scripture. Jonathan goes through and he's knocking men down and he's slaying them and cutting them and working his way man after man, and his armor bearer is coming behind him and putting the finishing touches on each kill and making sure that each one of those guys are dead as the battle commences. I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in a fight before, and I'm not saying that you should, get involved in fights, but boy, I tell you what, fighting takes a lot out of you. Just to spar with somebody for 30 seconds to a minute. Boy, I tell you what, that takes a lot of energy. After 10 to 15 seconds of using all of the energy that your body has and all of the focus that your brain has to try to anticipate what your opponent is going to do, to try to counter what your opponent is doing, and to try to win this particular battle, boy, 30 seconds of that lasts a long time, and it wears you out. A full minute of fighting, whether it's wrestling on the mat or sparring in some sort of a martial arts or fighting in hand-to-hand combat with swords and spears, boy, it really takes a toll on a soldier. It really takes a toll on anyone to be fighting for that amount of time. But then for the amount of time that Jonathan fights, it says in verse number 14, and that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men. 20 men, is that it? I have a tendency, when I read that, 20 men, I was expecting at least 1,000. I was expecting something more miraculous than that. 20 men? Well, look what it says here. 20 men within, as it were, an half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. It says in verse 15, and there was trembling in the host, in the field, and among the people. The garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked, so it was a very great trembling. Jonathan didn't kill everybody in the garrison. He didn't have to. He went and he attacked those 20 men that were coming at him, and he killed every one of them in a half acre of land, and we all understand what that is, maybe the size of our parking lot here, a half acre of land. Kills 20 men, and then everybody else is standing there and is watching, and news spreads quickly that 2 men of Israel came up and killed 20. Man, if all of the Israelites are as strong and as good of fighters as that, we're in trouble. But even more than that, there was an unreasonable fear. There was a trembling that spread throughout the host, among the people, in the garrison, amongst the spoilers. They trembled, the earth quaked, and they began to fear Israel's God. It says in verse number 16, we kind of switch from, we take the scene from where Jonathan is and his armor bearer over there at where the Philistines are, and then we switch scenes back to the camp where Saul is, still sitting comfortably with his dwindling army of 600 men. And look what happens. It says, and the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude here referring to the Philistine army, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. We've seen this before. This discomfiting of God's enemies. Then said Saul unto the people that were with him, and look at what Saul's first reaction is. Okay, here is Saul, and he's worried about what's going to happen with Israel. What's going to happen with the Philistine army? Are they going to survive? Are we going to be completely wiped out? Am I going to lose my life? Are they going to take my head and hang it off of a wall so that they'll cause all of the other nations around them to fear the Philistines, and Israel will once again be under the thumb of Philistia for the next 60 years? He's sitting there fearing those things, and then when salvation comes and the Philistine army is melting away and they're beating back one another, they're killing themselves, Saul's first reaction is, okay, who disobeyed my orders and left the camp? Okay, who's gone out there and done this? That's his first reaction. And we'll see throughout this passage that this is not Saul's only very poor reaction to these events. It is not his only poor decision. So he says, number now and see who is gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Captains, lieutenants, go and find out who's missing. Go and find out who's out there attacking and causing this trouble. Saul is afraid now. He says in verse 18, and Saul said unto Ahiah, bring hither the ark of God. For the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass, while Saul talked unto the priest, that the noise was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said unto the priest, withdraw thy hand. He's still right there talking to the high priest, telling him to go get the Ark of the Covenant, to bring it to the battle because we're going to need it. We need something to symbolize God's presence since my sacrifice that I tried a couple days ago didn't go very well. I need something, so bring the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe that'll protect us. Maybe that'll scare the Philistines off because they're afraid of the Ark of the Covenant. But while he was still standing there talking to the priest, over across the valley, the roar of battle increased and grew louder, wailing, yelling, screaming, the sounds of metal clashing, hooves, chariots, people's feet stomping on the ground. It must have been an awful cacophony of noise for Saul and his men way over here to hear it. And the noise increased, and he said, stop, don't do it. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle, and behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. So Saul, now at this point, okay, we need to go find out what's going on. He gathers his 600 men. They march over to where the battle was going on, and they looked, and behold, there was nobody else there but the Philistines fighting. The Philistines were fighting themselves. Well, at this point, once they realized that, Israel begins to jump into the battle. The Hebrews, it says, that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned. So when the Philistines came and encamped against Israel, some of the Israelites actually went and camped with the Philistines to help them fight against King Saul. That's incredible, a civil war. But when they saw what was going on with the Philistines, they switched sides really quickly. Saul, I probably wouldn't trust those people in the future if I were you. They seem to turn tail whenever the winds blow in their favor. Israel begins to turn and to fight against the Philistines. Saul and his men fight against the Philistines, and they chased and followed hard after them. It says in verse number 23, "So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Bethaven." But Saul, even in the midst of this great victory, which, by the way, Saul cannot claim this victory. But even in the midst of this great victory, it was not Saul who's the hero. It was his son Jonathan who was the hero. And in the midst of a great victory, somehow Saul is going to find a way to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. He's going to find a way to make this all about himself. And somewhere in this past year and a half, 2 years, Saul has changed. He's no longer that humble man who was afraid to step into the leadership. Now he has turned into the selfish man that wants the attention and wants the glory. He has turned his heart against the Lord. Somewhere in the past year and a half, 2 years, maybe it was when he tried to offer a sacrifice contrary to Samuel, but I highly doubt it started then. Somewhere he had lost his heart for the Lord, and God had stopped speaking to Saul. And we'll see that a little bit later, but Saul makes an oath. We're not going to get into that this week, but Saul makes an oath and says that, "Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies." He tells his army, his men, that if you choose to eat food, you'll be cursed and you'll be killed. No food until tonight when the battle is over. Don't stop along the way and nourish yourself on berries. Don't stop along the way and nourish yourself on bread that you brought with you. Don't stop along the way and nourish yourself. As I mentioned before, fighting even just for 60 seconds is intense and so very tiring. And you use up an incredible amount of energy and you have to replace that energy. When an army chooses to not replenish that energy and nourishment, they become very weak, they faint, many pass out, you lose your physical strength, you're unable to focus, you make poor decisions. And here Saul is literally crippling his army. Well, as we get further into the story, Jonathan never heard about this particular oath that Saul had made. And it's going to come back to bite Saul here in a little bit. And Saul still is going to be blind. He's still going to be blind by his own selfishness, his own grandeur, that he's not going to see the fact that God has forsaken him. And that's a sad thing. He's not going to see the fact that the distance between him and the Lord has grown and grown and grown. And that is sad. I hope I don't find myself in the same place that Saul does. Oh, Saul may have been good looking. Oh, Saul might have been tall and strong. He might have been the savior in the battle against the Ammonites. He might have had the people's happiness and respect. But he didn't have God. He had a lot of things going for him. But humility no longer was one of those things. A love for the Lord and serving the Lord, obedience, faithful obedience even to the last second, waiting and being patient on the Lord to give him the plan for battle and to deliver them, those were no longer Saul's strong suits. Let's learn from Saul, but let's also learn here in chapter 14 from Jonathan. Jonathan was a true knight of God who said, I don't care if I lose my life. God is going, He can and He will work through me, and I'm going to step out and I'm going to call out God on His promises, and God is going to do something great and mighty. And so did God do something great and mighty through one man, Jonathan. Not Saul, Jonathan. And I think this is one of the main reasons why Jonathan and David, who may have already been anointed at this point, become such good friends. Because their hearts seem to be knit with God's heart. But for some reason, God still does not want Jonathan to be king after his father. He's already chosen someone else. Let's learn from Jonathan to be this, I don't want to say call out God on His promises. That sounds bad, but let's expect God to keep His promises, because we know He will. His promises, which we have read here in these stories of the past, are still real for today in our situations that we find ourselves in today. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, once more I thank You for this ability that we have to be able to meet together even over the internet and other ways. Lord, I pray that You would work in the hearts of our people here at the church. I pray that You would help us to not be discouraged. I pray that You would help us to spend time with one another, praying for one another. Lord, I pray that You would help us to be able to gather back together here at church again very soon. And Lord, I pray that You would work it out so that these videos can be seen by the church, that the CDs and DVDs that I deliver can be seen and heard by the church. And Lord, I pray that You would give me wisdom and understanding and learning how to do that the best way possible. And Lord, once more, we ask for Your hand of blessing upon Virginia, upon Augusta County, upon our church, Shenandoah Baptist Church. We ask that You would increase our spirituality, Lord. I pray that You would increase our love for You and our desire to serve You, but also increase our light as a testimony in this area. And Lord, I ask for Your hand of blessing upon this day. And I ask all this in Your Son's name I pray. Amen.